Professor Arlen Voss stood at the front of the xenobiology lecture hall, his chitinous fingers tapping rhythmically against the containment unit. The Carvex instructor's compound eyes scanned the assembled cadets, noting the way most of them had unconsciously shifted their seats backward when he'd wheeled in the mysterious cargo. "Today's lesson," he announced, his voice carrying the distinctive clicking undertone of his species, "concerns instinctual threat assessment and apex predators from the Dracon system." A nervous ripple passed through the class. The Galactic Academy's xenobiology program was renowned for its hands-on approach, but Professor Voss had a reputation for pushing boundaries. Among the 73 students representing 42 different species, only one appeared genuinely unbothered by the announcement. Cadet Mira Solan sat in the third row, her posture relaxed, dark eyes curious rather than concerned. The human had been an oddity since her arrival at the Academy 6 months prior. While most species sent their most aggressive specimens to military training programs, humans seemed to send anyone who passed their basic requirements, regardless of their demeanor. Professor Voss had been studying her responses throughout the semester. Fascinating creature, really, lacking natural armor, venomous defenses, or impressive physical capabilities compared to most sapient species. Yet humanity had somehow clawed its way to space travel and earned their seat at the Galactic Council. The Dracon Shadow Stalker, Voss continued, manipulating the containment unit's controls, reaches maturity at 3 standard years. Adults stand 2 meters at the shoulder, possess retractable claws capable of shearing through starship hull plating, and rank among the most efficient killers in known space. He paused for effect. These specimens are 4 months old. The transparent front of the containment unit hissed open. 3 creatures tumbled out, each roughly the size of a human child's backpack. Their midnight blue scales caught the light with an iridescent sheen, and their multiple eyes swept the room with predatory focus. Sharp quills ran along their spines, and even at this young age, their claws clicked ominously against the lecture hall floor. "Your assignment," Professor Voss said, his tone calm and measured, "is to observe their hunting behavior and assess whether they identify any of you as prey." Several students immediately activated their personal shield generators. Others pressed themselves against the backs of their seats. The 3 cubs separated, each beginning to prowl the aisles with startling coordination for creatures so young. Mira Solan didn't move. She watched with interest as the nearest cub approached her row, its head swiveling as it analyzed each student. A Valorian cadet in front of her extended his defensive spines with an audible click. The cub paused, tilted its head, then moved on. Professor Voss observed from his position, one claw hovering near the emergency recall beacon. In 17 years of conducting this demonstration, he'd never had to use it. The cubs were dangerous, certainly, but their instincts were sound. They could distinguish between potential threats, prey, and beings best left alone. What happened next would become the subject of interstellar academic debate for years to come. The first cub reached Mira's row. Instead of continuing its assessment pattern, it stopped. Its multiple eyes focused entirely on the human cadet. She didn't activate shields or freeze in fear-induced paralysis like some of the others. She simply met its gaze and remained still. The cub took a step closer, then another. Then it chirped. The sound was completely unexpected. A soft, almost plaintive vocalization that Professor Voss had only heard cubs make in the presence of their parents. The other 2 cubs' heads snapped toward their sibling, and they immediately bounded down the aisle. "Extraordinary," Voss breathed, his translator barely catching the word. All 3 Shadowstalker cubs converged on Mira Solan. But instead of circling her as prey or displaying warning behaviors, they crowded against her legs. The first cub placed its front paws on her knee, stretching upward like a domestic animal seeking attention. Mira looked down at the apex predator cubs with an expression Professor Voss had learned to recognize as distinctly human. A soft smile, eyes crinkling at the corners in a display that indicated pleasure rather than threat. Slowly, carefully, she extended one hand. "Easy there, little one," she murmured, her voice carrying a gentle tone. The cub nuzzled into her palm. Within seconds, all 3 cubs had climbed into her lap, curling around each other and the human in a pile of scales, quills, and contentment. Soft chirping filled the lecture hall as they settled against her warmth, their earlier predatory alertness completely abandoned. The classroom had fallen into stunned silence. Professor Voss approached cautiously, his scientific mind racing through possibilities. Cadet Solon, have you had any prior exposure to Dracon fauna? No, sir, Mira replied, gently stroking the spine of the nearest cub, carefully avoiding its quills. Never been to the Draken system. Then this is... Voss paused, struggling to process the scene. Unprecedented. One of the cubs had begun making a rumbling sound, the equivalent Voss knew from his research of a contented purr. These were creatures that would grow to hunt in packs, to take down prey 3 times their size, to fear virtually nothing in their natural habitat. And they had chosen to treat a human as their parent. Perhaps, Mira said thoughtfully, her fingers still moving in gentle, rhythmic motions across scales that would someday be nearly impenetrable. They recognized something familiar. Humans have been living with predators for thousands of years. We domesticated wolves, learned to coexist with big cats, even kept reptiles as companions. She looked up at Professor Voss. Maybe they smell that history on me. The generations of trust building between humans and creatures that could easily kill us. Professor Voss stared at her, then at the cubs purring in her lap, then back at her. His understanding of predator-prey dynamics, carefully cultivated over decades of study, suddenly felt incomplete. The human hypothesis, he said slowly, his translator struggling with the concept, is that your species' relationship with danger is fundamentally different from ours. Mira shrugged, a gesture that made the cubs adjust their positions slightly. We don't really see the world in terms of threats and non-threats, Professor. We see potential friends, potential family, potential companions, even the dangerous ones. She smiled down at the cubs, especially the dangerous ones. As Professor Voss watched his carefully planned lesson transform into something entirely unexpected, he found himself composing the research paper in his mind. Title: Human Paradox, Apex Predator Adoption Response in Species Lacking Natural Defenses. The galaxy, he reflected, had greatly underestimated humanity's strangest weapon, their absolute refusal to accept that anything was too dangerous to befriend. The cubs, meanwhile, had fallen asleep, secure in the presence of the strange, soft creature that smelled like trust and tasted like safety. And in lecture halls across the Galactic Academy, the recordings of this session would eventually become mandatory viewing, a lesson not in predator behavior, but in the unexpected nature of humanity's place among the stars.